Ed Park is a Korean-American writer and editor who wrote his first award-winning debut novel, Personal Days, in 2008, but it wasn't until last November, 15 years later, that he returned with his second novel called Same Bed, Different Dreams. Publishers Weekly described it as an ingenious epic of Korean and Korean-American history framed in a satire of the publishing and tech industries. The book was also listed by the New York Times as one of the most 100 notable books of 2023. To talk more about his new book and ask him why it took so long to come out with his second book, we have joining us via video call today, Ed Park. Mr. Park, hello and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you for your time today. Can you first briefly tell our listeners just a bit more about who you are and your career in your own words before we talk about the new book?
Sure. I was born in Buffalo, New York, many years ago. My parents had come there from Korea, and my father was and is a psychiatrist there. And I, grew up in Buffalo. There was a small but, kind of tight-knit Korean community there. My cousins lived there. My grandparents eventually lived there. And I had friends who were Korean and others who weren't. But it was also, the 70s and 80s. And, I did sort of stand out a bit. If you were Asian, you definitely stood out a bit. So there was, kind of a process of assimilation to a degree, and it was. But the whole time, we didn't really visit Korea that much. I visited once when I was 11 years old, but I learned about Korea from my parents, especially through the stories my father would tell. And I was always very, I was interested in it, but it was also a bit mysterious. And it was kind of like as I got older, I went to college, and I eventually went to graduate school at Columbia for a writing program. And there I took a class on modern Korean history, which really I found very stimulating, very interesting, and a lot of the ideas in this novel, were the seeds were planted a bit during that class. In any case, I worked at a newspaper here in New York called The Village Voice, which was once kind of the great alternative weekly newspaper here, and I worked there for many years. I was an editor and a writer. I was a movie critic. I became the literary editor there, and my first novel, which is called Personal Days, came out in 2008, and that was really like a kind of a dark office comedy, loosely inspired by my experience at The Voice, especially as ownership changed and people were laid off left and right, including myself. So that book came out back then, and you mentioned at the top of the show that it's been 15 years between books, and a lot has happened since then. I had a family. I had two sons, and the oldest just turned 16, and I was busy with a lot of different jobs and just life in general. I taught for a while at places like Columbia. I currently teach at Princeton, and I also worked in the publishing industry as a book editor. So
Right.
there's a lot going on. But about 9 years ago, which now sounds like a long time. Around 2014, I did kind of have this story idea, or just these characters, these voices that eventually became Same Bed, Different Dreams. And in this book, I really wanted to explore kind of ideas and figures and events in Korean and Korean American history, and kind of include them in sort of the usual way I write, which is more of a comic novel
Sure.
type of book. So Whether that worked, people seem to like it, but it's definitely like a couple different kinds of writing that merge in this novel.
Right, so can you tell us a bit more about the new book, Same Bed, Different Dreams? A couple of lines of what it's about, essentially.
Of course. So it on one level, there are three storylines. One of them, kind of more or less the present day, concerns a guy named Soon Sheen, who is used to be a writer, but he works at a big tech company called Gloat, Gloat. That is kind of a combination of every big tech company that you have here in America. There's social media. There's like online, you buy stuff online. Everything you can imagine is sort of wrapped up in here, and he is invited at the beginning of the book by an old friend to meet a Korean author who has come to New York City to visit. They're having a big kind of literary dinner party for him, and so Soon is living outside of New York, but he comes in, and it's a big kind of party scene. Lots of different sort of Asian American, Korean American literary artistic types are there. Very, it's kind of funny. It's a satirical take on publishing, on technology, things like that. But at the end of the dinner, he has this manuscript that the name of the Korean writer is in the book. They change his name to Echo, Echo. It's E Cho, and so they kind of condense it into the American word echo. And soon finds himself in possession of a unfinished book by this writer, and it's called Same Bed, Different Dreams. And so there's a book within a book, and inside this unfinished novel is what is purports to be the secret history of the Korean provisional government, which I'm sure your listeners know, a real kind of a patriotic body that was formed in 1919 after the March 1st
Right,
movement. And Syngman Rhee, who was already in American exile,
right,
was elected president. And it was, kind of a more of a figurehead body than it didn't really have any actual power. It was based in Shanghai.
right.
So one thing that this book within the book imagines is if they actually did have power and all these different people, mostly Korean, but some not,
Hmm.
people like Marilyn Monroe and James Dean and Jack London were all kind of involved in the KPG.
Hmm.
And so those two storylines, but Soon Sheen's life
Right.
as a tech worker and this book about the Korean provisional government kind of go hand in hand. And there's a third storyline which is a little more complicated, but um, uh, kind of connects the various characters and has scenes set in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on.
Right.
It kind of jumps by decades. So um, that's a very messy nutshell, but that's sort
So
of
that's the setup.
um, that's a setup. Yeah.
What we found interesting as well, though, it's quite a departure from your first book. You said the first book, it's about office life,
Sure.
essentially, of New Yorkers. And I read in an interview that that's what you wanted to write about, the life of office workers in New York, rather than your identity as a Korean American at the time. But the second book, Same Bed, Different Dreams, is far
Hmm.
more heavily imbued with Korean culture and history. Can you tell us about that shift? Was that challenging? Why did you want to explore that more at this time as well?
Well, to be honest, I'd written several books before Personal Days that were never published, and one of them had a lot of actually Korean Korean content, slightly different from this book, but things like anyway, there was a lot of Korean stuff in there. Um, Personal Days was a very quick novel. It was almost like written directly. It was like torn out of my life as a worker, I was an editor, but in the novel, we don't specify what I don't specify what kind of company it is. So people are just kind of going around and seeing the workplace collapse around them, and race doesn't really enter into it. I was more interested in kind of workplace dynamics and that sort of thing, and I felt like, I mean, looked at another way, I I'm Korean. I've thought about Koreanness, for my whole life, and it didn't seem like the right venue to explore that. Like that book was about office life. Um, when I got the first ideas for this book, I knew immediately that there was something, you know, this would be an opportunity to kind of um, tap into those other sources of interest to me,
Hmm.
things from Korean history, the KPG, very interesting, somewhat problematic figures like Syngman Rhee, Philip J. Son, Soja Pil, um, the Korean writer Yi Sang, and the Korean American writer Young Hil Kong. These are just some of the characters who kind of I pulled into this novel simply because they interested me, and I thought it would be fun to see what all these seemingly unrelated things that have held my interest, like to see
Right.
if I could make them connect in a interesting and entertaining way.
Have you had any response from Korean readers? I think it'd be interesting to see what they think, especially because of the real life historical context you've put in there. And also, do you think there could be any plans for this book to be translated into Korean at some point? Is that something you'd like to see?
I would love to see it. I mean, if there are any Korean publishers who are interested, please be in touch. My personal days was also not uh, translated into Korean, and I understand. I was in Korea a couple years ago, and most of the books in translation are kind of the best-selling books in America. It's not really about uh, Korean American identity. Like I don't know that that's sort of a of much interest to readers in Korea. Um, I will say though that this is in a way my attempt through fiction to make sense of uh, Korea's very kind of momentous, somewhat tragic, somewhat triumphant century. It kind of starts, the historical things start in the early 20th century, and really they go up to the present, but they kind of like climax in the 80s, 1980s. Um, I really did, you know, one reason it took me 9 years to write was just um, kind of realizing the scope and the maybe the gravity of what I was trying to pull off. And in terms of Korean readers, they're aside from my family, who they've all read it now and have really gone deep into it and enjoyed it. Yes, I've heard from especially Korean American readers, other Korean American writers in particular. Um, One of the first readers was a writer named Kathy Park Hong, who's an incredible poet, but also wrote this book called Minor Feelings, which was um, a sensational collection of essays, many of which reflect on
Hmm.
being a Korean American. Um, uh, there's a writer named Ilian Woo who best-selling New York Times author this year with or last year with a book called Master Slave Husband Wife, and she's been a real cheerleader. Um, there's a writer named Chris Lee who I think actually lives in Korea now, but publishes in America, who wrote a really very good and interesting take
Right.
review of it in the Atlantic. And I thought she had a really good point that this idea. So one of the aspects of my book is it imagines the KPG still existing today and working secretly. I don't really say how, but kind of, working secretly to bring about some kind of unification of North and South
Sure.
Korea. And she wondered if this was actually more of a dream of the Korean diaspora. So people like me who, I've never,
Right.
I actually did live in Korea for about 9 months after college. That's a different story. But, I wasn't raised there.
Right.
Can't really speak Korean, though I can understand it. And it's like almost a fantasy of,
Right.
healing if the country could somehow be one again, and she's, her review says that might not be what Koreans in Korea are actually, concerned about these days. Maybe it was, in decades past, but it was a really good review. I mean, she was very complimentary, but she brought up an interesting point.
Well, it's been fascinating to talk to you. The time has flown by. We are almost out of time. Just one more very
Oh,
quick
wow. Okay.
question. Are there any more
Yes.
works on the way? Will your fans have to wait 9 more years for the next work? Or, in fact, you mentioned earlier
Yeah.
that you have some other unpublished works. Could they ever see the light of day, do you think?
I don't think those will. I mean, they're very much of their time. I'm proud of them, but they're they're very big books, and I don't think I don't want to look backwards at this point. So I have a story collection that hopefully will be out soon. The stories are all done. Let's say in the next year or so. But I am working on another novel, which I don't think will be as kind of sprawling as this one. Like when I was writing this book, Same Bed, Different Dreams, I was like, I'm going to take everything I've stored up, every thought I've had, every like fictional idea I've had having to do with Korea. It's all going in this book, and it was kind of a great feeling to feel like it was all out there. And then of course, I had other ideas, and so the I don't have a title for the novel that I'm working on, but it will be in kind of a different register. But I do anticipate there being kind of different sections,
Right.
each with a different tone
Right.
and time period.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. It's been fascinating to talk to you and hear your story today. We've been talking to writer Ed Park, and his second novel, Same Bed, Different Dreams, is out now. Mr. Park, thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.